Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College Football Playbook podcast. I'm Marc Givler, joined by Tyler Shoemaker, as always. Uh, Second week, we're going to break down the college football playoff rankings. This is the second to last rankings, so there's one more weekend left before we get the real deal next weekend. Um, first of all, Tyler, again, we talked about this last week at the opening. Anything surprise you this week as we kind of look through? I guess we can throw up the top 6 or 10 teams here and kind of look through those, but anything shock you here on Tuesday evening about the order or kind of where certain teams fell?
Um, I mean, really, especially when we're talking about the top group there. I mean, nothing really surprised me. I put together, we talked about my power ratings, but I also put together like a resume style ranking to try to figure out, where the committee might go here. I actually did have Ohio State fourth in that by about 2.5 points, which was Ohio State's kind of comfortably in fourth in my resume rankings. They're 2.5 points behind Michigan at three and 2.5 points ahead of USC at five. Um, all of the metrics love Ohio State over USC. So I would have Ohio State fourth, but I'm not shocked that the committee went ahead and put USC at fourth, kind of giving them the opportunity to be win and be in this weekend.
Well, let's start there then. I think it's we'll get on to a couple other things to look at here, but let's start at that decision at 4 and 5. I think the top 3 was easy, and I think it was probably pretty easy to slot things, beyond 5 without too much controversy. But um, to me, this doesn't really matter. I think, as far as people are going to try and read into this. Well, USC's 4, Ohio State's 5, so that's the committee telling us that if USC loses, they could still get in and stay ahead of Ohio State. Do you think the committee is setting up to leave that scenario open, and that's why they did that? Because obviously you could not put USC 5, and then if they lose to Utah on Friday, I have to keep remembering the Pac-12 is on Friday.
Yeah.
You could not actually justify jumping Ohio State then for 4 at that point. So do you think that's what's happened here, or do you think it was kind of arrived at independently?
Yeah, I think it would have to be that. I think they are just giving themselves some flexibility next week, depending on what happens this week, because I mean, like I said, there's really no metric out there that says USC is a better team than Ohio State. Even from a resume standpoint, I understand, it's not a power rating. So even from a resume standpoint, there's really nothing out there that would lead you to think that USC should be ranked ahead of Ohio State, other than we know the way the committee has consistently thought over these years. And when you lose matters, and Ohio State losing the last week of the season is completely different than if Ohio State and Michigan played week one and Ohio State had the exact same resume, but you put the loss in week one instead of week game 12, and it's a different story. So yeah, I think the committee is just giving themselves some flexibility for next week, which frankly I don't really blame them for that.
Right. I mean, and it really doesn't particularly matter, in my opinion. I don't think there's much chance that USC could lose and still get in. I don't. I personally think if USC loses, they're out. I think Ohio State's in at that point. I think that's pretty clear cut. But it does give them, as you said, the flexibility to. Who knows? Maybe there's a terrible call at the end of the game, and it sets up a Utah game-winning field goal or something like that, and it would give them some type of ammunition to keep things as is. Um, conversely, if you're Ohio State, you can't really be too upset about that. I mean, again, if you just stay at home and you win the bye week, and USC loses, you're in. So I don't think it's ultimately that important. Can we go back to those that resume rankings? Can you explain for everyone who's watching this, if you're watching this on YouTube versus listening, of course, when this black and white list goes up here, this is not your power rankings. These are
Right.
resume rankings. Can you just kind of, without giving away the entire formula, explain what you're trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, so high level, I was just curious, because I've always done the power rating, and that's going to tell us who would be favored over who, in theory on a neutral field. But I wanted to try to kind of get inside the committee's head a little bit to think, to try to figure out like, okay, whose resume actually is the best. And as you can see, I actually have TCU at 2, Michigan at 3, and that's just a function of Michigan's strength of schedule. So I mean, high level, these rankings are a function of a team's strength of schedule and then being penalized for losses on that schedule.
I actually think that came out really well. There's actually not a lot there I would change if I were just kind of playing God and putting the teams wherever I wanted. I mean, I'd have Michigan 2, TCU 3, but I mean, that's not a huge
Yeah,
deal either way.
I think so I've got Michigan like a tenth of a point behind Ohio State in my power rating. I think what happened with the resume is that with the resume ranking, I didn't take into account like margin of victory. It was basically just win or loss, which again is probably imperfect. And this is a newer formula for me, so I'm sure I'm going to make tweaks over time. But I wanted to give this a go, and I mean, like you said, it especially at the top end here. I mean, it came out pretty well. I think pretty close to what the committee came up with. So I'm happy with the early returns on this, but I'll continue to craft it. But yeah, I mean, Michigan beating Ohio State by 3 scores at Ohio State is accounted for in my power ratings. It is not accounted for in the resume rankings.
Anyone, is there a most, and we did this last week too, is there a most overrated, most underrated team on the official committee list that you saw that you kind of disagree, anything you disagree with there, or did maybe last week help clarify things?
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas and South Carolina both being, what are they, 19 and 20, I think, in the committee. Yeah. So, I mean, not a huge, I don't have a huge beef with that, but I don't have either of those teams in the top 25 of my resume rankings. Tulane at 18 was a little low. My formula had them at 10, which might be a little high, but again, the formula is what it is. So, I mean, I honestly, this week I really don't have much to gripe about with what the committee did. And at this point in the season, the top 6 or 7 is probably the most important anyway, because we're talking about who's going to get into the CFP. But in terms of the whole top 25, I think it's a much easier exercise to do at this point when you've got just a couple one-loss teams, a few two-loss. It kind of takes care of itself at this point in the season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, didn't Tulane beat Kansas State?
They did at Kansas State, I believe.
So now they've got 2 losses, I think. Kansas State's got 3. I think Tulane's
Yeah,
10-2.
Tulane's got 2 losses. I can't. They lost to Ole Miss, maybe. No, that was Troy. I can't think of Tulane's losses off the top of my head, but I mean they've been a quality team all year, and they've got some good wins as well. I mean they just beat Cincinnati at Cincinnati, snapping their 30 plus game home winning streak.
Yeah, it's and look, there's some games on the resume that are a little off. You 3 overtimes to beat Houston, so they've been in some close games. The
Yeah.
Southern Miss loss, that's who one of the teams got that jumps out. And then they lost to UCF by a touchdown, and obviously they'll get a chance on Saturday to redeem that. But I would agree with you. I think Tulane, if you're gonna, obviously they're very high on Kansas State. So if you're going to be very high on Kansas State,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's one of those things necessarily where, obviously Tulane's in a lesser conference, but I'm not exactly super high on the Big 12 this year, and I'm not so sure it's one of those deals where you can look at Kansas State and be like, well, if they played Tulane's schedule, they would be, they'd be undefeated.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost to Tulane, and I don't think Kansas State would have necessarily ran that schedule. So that's kind of an interesting gap to me. South Carolina is, like, for me, probably the toughest team to rank,
Yep.
because it's hard to ignore what they've done the last couple weeks,
Yep.
but they were also, I mean, they were pretty bad there
Yeah,
for a
especially
while.
offensively early in the season, they were very bad. So yeah, that just kind of goes back to like they're getting hot here late in the season, and that matters. And I frankly I don't have a problem with that because I mean they in college basketball like March Madness they talk about that a lot during like the selection show is who's been playing well lately, and I think that does have to matter because I mean these teams do evolve over the season, and
Yeah,
I think South Carolina. I don't have a problem with them getting credit for two huge wins here late in the season.
yeah. I'm still a little miffed with the Tennessee Alabama thing. I think they finally started to get it right on Penn State. That was a team I said last week was
Yep.
super underrated. They by benefit of some teams losing in front of them, obviously as well. But even to the committee's credit, they did jump them over Clemson. Now we'll see what happens if Clemson wins the ACC championship. Do they just put them right back ahead of Penn State? I don't know that I would do that, but I think maybe the committee might. But
Yeah.
they seem to get Penn State a little. But I'm just Tennessee over Alabama. Just I don't know. I mean, Alabama's LSU loss got weaker after LSU, crapped the bed there against Texas A&M. Tennessee beats Alabama. I
Yeah. I
know the
mean,
score was close, but I thought Tennessee was mostly in control. I know Alabama had a nice surge there in the second half. Obviously, that was a game that probably could have went either way, maybe in the fourth quarter. But I thought Tennessee was mostly in control, like for the majority of that game. I don't know. And again, it probably doesn't matter because I don't think either of those teams have a chance. So maybe let's just
yeah.
flip to that. How many teams have a chance?
Yeah.
How many teams have a chance right now?
Yeah. I know you've been dying to get to this part because I've seen you on Twitter, going crazy about the Alabama stuff. And I'm right there with you. The funny thing is going back to this Alabama Tennessee thing. So as you can see, like my rankings actually came out 6, 7, 8 came out exactly as the committee has it. So my formula actually did, produce Alabama one spot ahead of Tennessee also. Um, it's hard because like you should you should be taking into account head to head when you're doing a resume, like the committee's doing. But I don't know. I mean, Tennessee, they can blame the Hendon Hooker injury. They can blame the South Carolina loss on that. But like
That game was way
he played
over.
for a lot of that game, and they got
Mhm.
taken to the woodshed. I mean, it's not like they were in. It's not like Ohio State 2011 with Braxton Miller against Nebraska, and they're killing Nebraska, and then Braxton Miller goes down and they lose the game. It wasn't like that. They were getting killed with Hendon Hooker on the field. So um I'm not as sympathetic to Tennessee's cause maybe as you are, but uh, as far as teams that have a chance, I mean, I think it's five. I think it's the top four and Ohio State, and that's it. I think even if TCU and USC would both lose this weekend, I think the committee would probably just keep TCU at 3. So you avoid an Ohio State Michigan rematch, and you just slide Ohio State in at 4 if both teams were to lose. I don't think Alabama has a chance to get in.
I obviously agree. I've been kind of beating that drum for a while now. I, I've yet to have one person explain to me, other than some nonsensical, well, they'll just get the second SEC team in over Ohio State or something like that. I've yet to hear a compelling case for what would have to happen this weekend that would give the committee even just the slightest tinge of ability to put Alabama in this field. I don't. I mean, would every team currently in the top 4 have to lose by like 70 points? Like, I'm trying to understand what would have to happen.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's maybe the only scenario because I think even if all 4 teams lose this weekend, I just think you're going to reshuffle some things around. Ohio State probably slides in at 4, and again, it just goes back to those same 5 teams. To me, there's not a world that Alabama gets in. I mean, with 2 losses, and like you said, that LSU loss looks even worse now after they
Yeah.
lost to Texas A&M, who's a corpse at this point. I don't see a path.
And I mean, even just what's their path to getting to 5? Other
Yeah,
than other than like maybe USC getting obliterated by Utah, because what's their path to jumping Ohio State?
yeah,
You
none.
can't outscore the bye week by more than Ohio State. You're both gonna play 0-0 this week.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand about this rankings reveal and kind of the response to it with the national media and on Twitter is like there were people that were reading into Boo Kerrigan's comments and saying like, oh well, they said Ohio State and Alabama aren't locked into their spots. Alabama theoretically could jump Ohio State, and I'm like, how? Like you said, they neither one of them play. What would be the justification for moving them ahead of Ohio State at this point? Even in some like alternate universe where everyone loses and the committee decides that Ohio State and Alabama both are getting in, like Alabama's not going to be a higher seed than Ohio State. So they're not, there's no path for them to jump Ohio State. And I don't think there's a path for them to get in.
I mean, even like I mean, just play devil's advocate against myself here. LSU beats the brakes off Georgia, and now we're playing. Oh, see, Alabama lost to a great LSU team, and that loss gets better after it got significantly worse this past week when they lost to a terrible Texas A&M team. I mean, and playing a true freshman quarterback. I just don't.
I don't see it. Kevin here with the note that the All-State playoff predictor, so take that with a grain of salt, has Ohio State's playoff chances at 71%, USC at 20, and Alabama at 14 somehow. But I am not buying any of that.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's probably a little high on Ohio State. 71 seems a little high. I think it's probably at least a coin flip for them getting in.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
USC at
Well, I
20
mean,
seems low, but
yeah. I mean, just like from a probability standpoint. So I was telling Kevin this before we came on. My power ratings actually make Utah a half-point favorite this weekend against USC on a neutral. So that's a coin flip, and I mean that coin flip literally decides whether Ohio State's going to get in or not. So that to me, I'm with you. It's 50-50 that Ohio State gets in based on that.
here's the interesting scenario to me. So USC beats Utah on Friday, and TCU loses to Kansas State. Then what?
That one, I think that one will actually depend on how the game goes. Like I think USC can lose on a last-second field goal, and Ohio State's going to get in. With TCU Kansas State, I think it is a little different, at least based on the numbers that I'm looking at. Because, like I said, I've got TCU second in the resume ranking, and they're like firmly there. I mean, I've got them basically 7 points, resume points ahead of Ohio State. So, and that's basically my penalty for losing. So it's really going to just depend on how the game looks. If it's a scenario where they like control the game and then Kansas State comes back, final drive and wins it, that would make me a little nervous as an Ohio State fan. But also the wins are what they are. And you have to give TCU credit for going undefeated. That's extremely hard no matter who you play against. But the string of luck that they had at one point this season in playing backup quarterbacks, like including against Kansas State, they were getting, if I'm not mistaken, they were down double digits to Kansas State before Adrian Martinez, and then backup Will Howard. Will Howard also got hurt, so they were playing Kansas State's third string quarterback in that game. So with a healthy Kansas State this weekend, I think Kansas State's going to win.
Yeah, that game, I watched some of it. I know, if I remember correctly, kind of how that played out was Kansas State jumped on 28-10, but I think a lot of that was with Howard in. So I think Martinez had them.
I think he might have scored. I think he might have led one
ahead.
scoring drive and then got hurt like
Howard,
real early. And then Howard looked great. Yep.
And then then he got hurt.
Yep. So and that was, there was like a string there of 3 or 4 games in a row where they either the starting quarterback for the other team was the backup, or throughout the game the starter got hurt and the backup had to come in. So you give them credit for overcoming all of that, and being 12-0 is being 12-0, and they should be proud of that. But for you and I and people that are trying to predict what's going to happen and how it's going to shake out, I mean, I think you do have to kind of have that in the back of your mind that, like, yes, they're 12-0, but I don't think they're like Michigan and Georgia 12-0. I think their 12-0 is just a little bit less because of that. So just something to have in the back of your mind this weekend as you watch these games.
Yeah, I know there's people saying that if USC loses really close to Utah, they could still get in. I just don't see that.
I don't see it. The committee's told us now for how many weeks that Ohio State's a better team than USC. I get that they've lost since then, but their losses to the number 2 team in the country. I get that it was at home, and the way it ended, in my opinion, the final score wasn't really indicative of how the game flow went. But the score was what it was. So I guess how much is the committee going to penalize Ohio State for that? After they've told us that Ohio State's a better team than USC all year. So it will be interesting, but I'm of the mindset that USC losing in any fashion, whether it's overtime, last second field goal, I think a loss is if nothing else, it's the committee's excuse to put Ohio State in, because as we've seen, like, I know Ohio State fans like to think that, we just get screwed all the time and there's this conspiracy, but the reality is I think the TV executives would love to have Ohio State in the playoff. So if there's a way, not that matters much, but if it's a tiebreaker in the back of someone's mind, like that might be one vote in the room enough to get Ohio State in. So,
well, here's the other thing, and I know there's one school of thought here that it's actually bad for Ohio State that USC is playing Utah because, got to beat, Utah would have to beat USC twice. Always difficult to beat a team twice. And I get that. I think there's some validity to that. But the other thing here is, on the flip side, if USC loses to Utah, like, okay, you're clearly not better than Utah. You lost to them twice.
yep.
Like that throws out that anything can happen in one game. Anyone can lose to anybody. But USC's getting their rematch opportunity here. And if they don't take advantage of that, I don't think the committee is going to reward a team that loses to the same team twice in the regular season, in the regular season, and put them in the playoffs over a one-loss team.
Yeah, no,
I just don't. And
I don't think so.
And let's be frank. I mean, they got a pretty nice conference schedule. They didn't play Oregon. They didn't play Washington, right?
They didn't play Washington.
So they didn't play 2 of the 3 other best teams in the league.
Yeah. So the one other good Pac-12 team they played, they lost to. So,
and then the next best team that they played was Oregon State, which was a field goal. They won by a field goal. I mean, that was.
Yeah, I mean, and I know the committee says they don't necessarily factor in like margin of victory. They don't want to reward that, but at some point, like, part of your performance is how badly you beat a team. And USC, I mean, Oregon State turned out to be a good team, but I mean, that was a very close game. Washington State was a relatively close game. I mean, whereas Ohio State buried
Cal
people
by 6, Arizona by 8. I mean, those are bad teams.
Yep. Well, and I mean, you look at not only were those games close, but you look at the scores of those games, like the Arizona game. I mean, that
37.
how many points they give up to Arizona? I mean, 37. Yeah,
37 to Arizona, 35 to Cal, 43 to Utah in the loss, 45 to UCLA in the win.
Yeah, I mean, again, the committee says that they don't look, but your performance is how badly you can beat teams. And good teams beat bad teams, but great teams annihilate bad teams. And Ohio State annihilated everyone else on their schedule. Again, and I've had this conversation this week already, where you can't say, well, Ohio State got blown out by Michigan and then discredit the Penn State win because it was close until they blew Penn State out. So either Ohio State got blown out by Michigan and blew out Penn State, who's number 8, or the Penn State game was close and the Michigan game was close. You can't have it both ways. So you got to choose a side there, and either side I think is pretty beneficial to Ohio State, because yes, you got quote unquote blown out by the number 2 team in the country, but you also blew out the number 8 team in the country. So I think that's got to matter. So
they're gonna have, if it comes down to, like I said, if it comes down to a USC Ohio State thing, another bit of ammo Ohio State's going to have. They're going to have by far the best win.
Yep.
Of the two with Penn State. I mean, what if USC loses? What are we talking about? Like number 15 UCLA, who's kind of limped to the finish line here a little bit, is going to be. They're 17. Yeah, but I guess I'm projecting a little bit. I'm expecting maybe a couple teams lose, so maybe UCLA gets up to like 15 in the final rankings. Maybe if a couple of those teams lose in their conference championship game. So, whereas Ohio State's looking at what's worst case scenario? Penn State's 9. That's like the worst case. Maybe I guess 10 if Kansas State beats TCU pretty badly. Maybe Penn State falls to 10, but I don't know. That's kind of hard to. But then if Kansas State beats TCU, it's another. It goes right back to what we was talking about. Now does Ohio State get in over TCU? So it's interesting. I think, like I said, I think it's 100. I think it's as close to 100% as possible that Ohio State gets in if USC loses.
Yep. And Kevin makes a good point about divisionless conferences kind of having an advantage, because if the Big Ten had done what the Pac-12 did this year, scrap the conferences, then Ohio State and Michigan will be playing again this week. So, you can't live in a what if world, but I've heard people say like, well, you can't punish USC for losing in a weekend where they played and Ohio State didn't, but you're going to punish Ohio State because its conference decided to keep divisions for another year and the Pac-12 didn't. Because if the roles were reversed, I'm pretty sure Ohio State would, probably if Ohio State played USC schedule, I would think they would be undefeated. And if USC played Ohio State schedule, maybe they have one loss, but playing at Penn State wasn't easy. Playing Notre Dame, so I don't know. I think you have to have a consistent line of logic there, and you can't just kind of cherry pick what makes your argument look good.
Right. And ultimately, as you've kind of, a more direct way of saying it is basically like, USC by rules of their conference, not really by anything else other than just the way the conference is aligned this year. They get a chance to correct their loss.
Yep.
And Ohio State doesn't, just because of the division thing. I don't think anyone thinks, Purdue's second best team in the Big Ten. So it's just, and by the way, I'm kind of a divisions person. So this is kind of, I don't know. Well, I mean, that's probably another show topic at some point, but
yep, for sure.
I think we are, as we kind of look at the rankings and everything, debate the rankings, and we are seeing pros and cons of divisions and not having divisions, and I'm sure opinions on that are being formed as the Big Ten likely talking about going to no divisions in the future. I don't know if that's officially official, but it sounds like that's where they're heading here. So we shall see. All right, let's dive into a couple of these. We'll just do the Power Fives. We'll look at the conference championship games. Let's just start with the Pac-12 because, that is going to be Friday night. It's going to be a nice little appetizer for the day on Saturday. Utah, USC. Is the line still 3? That's what I just saw.
It's the last I saw here this afternoon.
Okay. Your ranking, your power ranking formula has it a little bit different, right?
Yep. I make it Utah -0.5. So these teams are basically even. So more of a coin flip type of game.
So what do you expect, I guess? Because they played a wild game last time. It looked like actually USC did have them beat for a minute there, and just some craziness there at the end. Do you give a team like USC the advantage here with not only the motivation of a playoff berth, but also the revenge factor? I mean, is that something I know you can't bake that into a power rankings formula,
right? But
and that's kind of where the human element comes in. But like, how do you kind of assess this?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can't really bake it into the number, but it is. I always talk about like the difference between like my projection versus like my handicap, and that those type of things, those external factors definitely do play into my handicap, before making a play. The interesting thing here, so the total the last time I checked was 67, which tells us It's going to be a lot of possessions. There's going to be a lot of swings in this game. So, I mean, in a game like that, I think it's going to look probably similar to how the last one looked, where it was just back and forth. And Utah had the fortune of having the ball last in that scenario. So we'll see how it plays out. But I mean, with a high total, and I'm projecting it as basically a coin flip. Like I think it's going to be an exciting game, and I don't know that I necessarily have a pick. If I haven't decided necessarily what I'm betting this week, but I would take the 3 points with Utah just because I think it's going to be so close.
Yeah, I think I would take the points if I was betting on the game. I do think Utah's got a pretty good chance of winning. Gosh, Caleb Williams has been really good down the stretch. It's kind of hard to go against him right now. My instinct right now is that USC pulls us out, but I do think Utah, maybe not as much as they would have been like last year when I think when healthy they were a little bit maybe better defensively than this year, but they have the formula, I think, on offense to not play keep away from Caleb Williams. It's hard to play keep away from Caleb Williams because USC's defense is not trying to be a smart ass here, but like USC's defense has been so bad
Yep.
at points this year where it's actually hard to play keep away because if they're not stopping you, you're probably getting chunk yardage. So your drives you're not doing those 8 to 10 minute drives because you're getting 8 to 10 yards at a time. But I do think they have the formula. It's kind of almost a Big Ten Midwesty type of program that he runs.
They really are. Like when all the expansion talk was going on, it's like, man, if Utah just had any type of like brand or market that the Big Ten was interested in, like they would fit in so perfectly from a style of play, at least in football.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think they have the right stuff to do it again. Whittingham versus Riley's awesome.
That was going to be my point. Is that Kyle Whittingham is the type of coach that you want to back in this type of situation because, I mean, he's been there forever. I'm sure he's had the opportunity to take bigger brand jobs, and he's happy there, and he just kind of built his culture there. And I think those guys like playing for him, and I feel like he kind of thrives in this type of role.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk, I mentioned kind of the things USC might have going for him, but Whittingham will. I mean, Utah's got nothing to lose here, essentially. I mean, okay, yes, I guess they have the Pac-12 to lose, but it's like they're not making the playoff either way.
Yep.
So they can kind of play spoiler here a little bit. I think they can play maybe a little more loose. I think Whittingham's coaching style kind of does line up with that type of scenario. So I think they'll throw the kitchen sink, but I'm not going against Caleb Williams. I think USC. I think USC is going to torture Ohio State fans in this game. I think it's going to be one of those. I think it's going to be very similar to, like you said, I think it's going to be similar to the last one. I think it's going to come down to kind of the last possession type of thing. But if I had to guess, I would guess USC. But
yeah, and one thing to keep an eye on in this game too is like I've been saying since like week 3 that USC's turnover luck is going to change because they've been the beneficiary of so many. Not all turnovers are random, but for the most part, they're unpredictable from game to game. But USC for now 12 games has been the beneficiary of the randomness. So like at some point that's gonna stop, whether that's this season or next or I don't know. But something to keep an eye on is like the turnover margin there, which factors into every game, of course, but specifically USC games. A lot of their games would have looked a lot different without them being +3 in turnover margin, just off of fumbles inside the 10-yard line and just random things like that.
yeah, just last week, Notre Dame left a lot of points on the field. That could have been a lot closer. And you and I talked about that, how your formula had USC
I mean,
as like a touchdown favor, 6-point favor, something like that. But if you looked more recent history, that would have had Notre Dame. So it's kind of a interesting game for us, I think, to watch with that kind of backdrop. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, and you just wonder if it, again, will it catch up to USC at the wrong time here? I don't know. Like I said, I think Utah is. I guess here's the other thing. Would you have rather had if your hope was that USC is going to lose? If you're an Ohio State fan or an Alabama fan or whatever, would you have wanted this or would you have wanted Oregon in there?
I think not only because Utah already beat them once, but like we just outlined, I think Utah is the type of team that can do it. I think they can play good enough defense to not just get and I think that's what would have happened with Oregon. Like, yes, Oregon's offense is more explosive than Utah's, but their defense is also abysmal as well. So it would have just been, I mean, I would love to see what they would have set the over under on that at. I mean, it'd have been probably in the high 70s.
Yeah. I think I probably trust Utah more here in this spot.
Yeah.
I think. But and as Kevin or producer Kevin Noon noted, Bo Nix a little volatile in big games.
Yeah,
So,
and he's a little banged up right now too. So
yes,
that would factor in that, because that would really suck. Is if if Oregon had made it, Bo Nix isn't 100%, and USC gets kind of a de facto bye in the conference championship. That would kind of suck if if you're an Ohio State or Alabama fan rooting for the chaos.
Yeah. Rising's a good quarterback. He's played in a lot of big games the last 2 years. I think Utah's pretty well battle tested this season. They've played a lot of close big games, and see what happens. Where are we going next? SEC, Georgia, LSU. Where does your formula have this one as far as the line? I think the latest line I have seen is like 17 and a half.
I think when I checked earlier this afternoon, it had actually gone up to 18.
Holy.
I'd make it 16, which earlier in the week it was, I think, 15 and a half in some spots, and sharp money ate that up pretty quickly. So that's why we're north of 17 now. So I mean, under 17, Georgia, I would have liked Georgia, but man, 17 and a half, 18 points, that's a lot. So I mean, I definitely think Georgia's going to win here. I don't think what LSU has done well, their defense has been pretty solid, but I mean, their quarterback, Jaden Daniels, I mean, he's so elusive with his legs, but Georgia's got the athletes on defense. I don't think that's going to matter much, because I mean, we saw the same. Hendon Hooker has been great with his legs this year too, and that didn't really pan out against Georgia. So if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm sleeping pretty well this week.
I don't think there's any question. This isn't really that hot of a take, but I don't think there's any question that Georgia defends mobile quarterbacks better than any team in the country.
Yeah.
Because that used to be the old like Alabama kryptonite, is if oh yeah, Saban and his Alabama, they've great defenses, but if you've got a quarterback that can move, that's kind of their kryptonite. I don't see that with Georgia. They're so athletic at linebacker.
Yeah.
And of course their front too, but like they just have aliens up in that front seven.
Yeah.
And it's just.
I mean, I'm sure every game the game plan is make him throw, but it's easier said than done. But I think Georgia actually can execute that game plan. So I really don't have any concerns about that game.
The other thing here, I think it hurts LSU is, they lay that egg against A&M, and now instead of your week of prep being, we're gonna shock the world here, we're gonna get in the playoff, we're rolling, we beat Alabama. Now it's, all that's out the window, guys. So let's just go ruin Georgia's season, except not really, because Georgia's already in.
They're still going to get in.
So and if we can beat Georgia by 100, they're still not going to put us in. So I think Texas A&M beats them twice, basically, is what I think. I think that game beats them twice. I think it's going to be awfully hard for Brian Kelly to get them firing on all cylinders this week. I think, and I think Georgia, Kevin's kind of the guy on this type of stuff, so he can correct me here. But I think Georgia has some motivation to get one. Now we'll see what happens with like the USC game, because I think, if you get Georgia in like a moment of honesty, they'd probably want to play TCU and not Ohio State in the 1-4.
Yep.
Someone like that, or USC, one of those two teams. But I also think there is some value in terms of them playing in Atlanta too.
Yep, for sure.
And that's a guarantee if they're the one. I mean, it could. I guess in theory, it could happen. I don't know. I guess Michigan could weirdly, opt to play in Arizona and
I mean, if Michigan somehow ends up with the 1, I think they would have to take the Peach Bowl just if for no other reason out of spite to send Georgia out west.
Exactly.
Yep. And give yourself a chance, potentially at a little bit easier path to a championship. So.
And let's be honest. I know there was some discussion tonight on the CFP ranking show about, what if Michigan's just jumps Georgia. If you didn't do it this week, I don't know how you're going to do that next week if they both win, no matter what the scores of those games are, just because Purdue, the lack of respect that I think they're going to have for Purdue.
Yep. Well, and that's just kind of like, had Michigan play, I mean, not only did Michigan have a bad non-conference schedule, but it was like abysmally bad. I mean, those 3 teams UConn actually turned out to not be as like bottom dwelling, but I mean, Hawaii and Colorado State are literally like 2 of the 15 worst teams in the country. So, and UConn usually is. So, I mean, had they just played anyone with a pulse in one of those 3 games, like that would have probably gone a long way. But I mean, you just can't look at Hawaii, Colorado State, and UConn and give any type of credit, no matter how bad you beat those teams. So I think that's probably what came back to bite them this week, because I mean, Georgia has the Tennessee win, which is great, but the way Michigan ended up beating Ohio State would have been enough to get them the 1 seed, I think, had they done anything in the non-conference.
Yeah. Yep. I've got Georgia big. 18's kind of a weird line to bet in any game. It's kind of a weird number for me, so I don't know if I would advise anyone to go out there and lay the 18 or not, but I'll be surprised if that's a close game. I think Georgia is likely to cover, and if not, we'll certainly, win by two touchdowns, 17 points, something. It'll be. I would be surprised.
Yeah, I think that the only way they don't cover that is their offense hasn't been great here lately. I mean, they only scored like 16 on Kentucky a couple weeks ago. So maybe they just suffocate LSU and it's like 28-3 or 28-10, some like very, very low scoring. But I don't know. I don't know how LSU scores, but I don't know that it's going to be very high scoring. So I mean, maybe the play there is the under.
Yeah. Big 12. Actually, let's save the Big 12 because I think that may be the most interesting game on Saturday. Let's just go to the Big 10 because I think we're going to get the 2 games out of the way here that I don't think are going to be completely competitive. Michigan, Purdue. Line is what? 16?
Yeah, 16 and a half. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's I projected at 23. I mean, my numbers.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is that at one point earlier in the season, like midway through the season, Purdue was like a top 15 team in my power ratings, and like now they are just so far down. I mean, my numbers just project Michigan to roll here.
It feels like a bad matchup for Purdue.
Yep.
It doesn't feel like on either side of the ball it's a very good matchup for Purdue. I think Michigan's going to be able to establish their running game, regardless. Regardless of Blake Corum's availability. I think Purdue's defense has let them down. And as Kevin pointed out, I don't know how to bake this into the game. Obviously, it's much bigger than football here. Aiden O'Connell, brother just passed away. I don't know. I'm sure that's going to give him some extra juice, but it just that looks to me like a mismatch in the trenches on both sides.
Yep.
And I do think that at some point, and even if we look at the games Michigan's played this year. A team like Illinois, who is not really going to back down from that challenge in the trenches on either side of the ball. I think, we saw them hang and they were able to do some things, especially there in the second half. I just don't think Purdue's as capable. I think Michigan covers. As long as it stays under 17, I would like Michigan to cover that. I think they probably win by about 3 touchdowns. I kind of have that ballparked similarly to the Georgia game. I could see more points being scored in this game than the SEC one, but where's the stops coming from, I guess, for Purdue? How are they going to, not only keep Michigan under 30, but not just get worn down in the second half just by Michigan's ground game? I don't see how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I just looked. I've got the Purdue defense ranked 73rd in the country, so that's going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I don't. And of course, it's funny, if you're an Ohio State fan, you're hoping Michigan wins by 100, which is kind of interesting. So, I had someone tell me today, oh, what if Michigan, they were get excited. Oh, what if Purdue could beat Michigan? I'm like, you're an Ohio State fan. Why would you?
Yeah,
you want Michigan to win by 100 on Saturday.
Yeah, those fans drive me crazy because they're like, I don't want to win no matter what. And it's like, you're literally biting off your nose to spite your face in that situation. Like if you're an Ohio State fan, you need Michigan to win and you need Michigan to look impressive. And I don't know what's hard to understand about that.
Yeah, Alabama or Ohio State or whoever else you might think has a puncher's chance, it doesn't really do them anything. Like Michigan's in.
Yep.
So
there's really it's like, okay, value. You just got pounded by the team that lost to Purdue. So
right, exactly. I mean, that's
good. So
and they're still going to get to play. Maybe that would set up Michigan at 4, maybe, depending on how things get set out. And if you're like secretly hoping they like play Georgia in the semis and get rolled again. I mean, maybe there's some type of long game there or something that people are playing, but I don't know. All right. Yeah. I'm a Big Ten guy, but there's so little intrigue to this game for me. I
know you said you're against, or that you would prefer to have divisions, but I think this type of game is the argument for doing away with divisions, because it's like, what's the point?
Well, the entire Big Ten is kind of the argument for doing away with divisions. If you look at the history of the again, I hate to say it, I'm such a diehard Big Ten guy, but it's rarely a good matchup. It's rarely a competitive game. It's rarely a compelling matchup. Even going,
it's really the two best teams.
It's hardly ever the two best teams. So I guess I'm into some sort of scenario where they can. It's weird though, because like the SEC for years, for a very long time in like the 90s, like the SEC, like the teams that were comprising the East Division were, Tennessee and Florida were like dominating the league. And then it flipped, and the SEC West, the SEC was very similar to what the Big Ten has been at one point, where the SEC West was just cakewalk through the SEC East, patsy every year that they would throw out there and sacrifice to the Wolves. That's obviously changed with Georgia. Georgia's resurgence has been huge because there was a long stretch where it's just like, okay, who is Alabama or LSU going to just crush in the SEC championship? So I get that. But it's probably, the Big Ten's probably a bad example for me to use here, because it is set up in a way where there has not been a lot of parity in the Big Ten over the years.
No.
The dominant teams have mostly been the dominant teams. And you'd have to go back. I mean, when's the last time both like Michigan and Ohio State? I mean, Michigan had some downtimes, but it didn't overlap with Ohio State's. Ohio State's had very, very few downtime really in the last 50 years. So the Big Ten would be a bad example here, but I think the SEC is a good example of this stuff is generally cyclical.
Yeah.
Like Florida and Tennessee used to be the programs in the SEC at one point. And then Alabama and LSU kind of wrestled that away. And now Georgia has provided some balance to the league. Tennessee looks like they're on the upswing. We'll see. It's 1 year and they're going to lose a lot of guys, but it's just, you do wonder, like, okay, so if we get so hyper concerned about the balancing of the divisions, it's like, well, sometimes, like nature finds a way, life finds a way. Is that the
Yeah.
Jurassic, like things do like cycle. We go through cycles. And so like, there's not much to say that, if you chop a league in half, that, one side may dominate for 5 or 10 years, but then it may swing the other way. So it's hard to just say, well, it's always going to be this way, is what I guess.
Yeah.
A
Well,
short way
I'm
of
I'm I'm sure Nebraska fans hope you're right.
right. I mean, and that's kind of like, I think at one point we all thought like, oh yeah, Nebraska, you got Nebraska and Wisconsin and sometimes Iowa, sometimes Iowa and then
Yeah, and
pretty
it's just not
Brian
panned out.
fans.
I mean, hopefully, we'll see what these coaching changes result in, but yeah, we'll see.
All right. So let's get to the ACC and then we'll wrap this up, talk Big 12. Clemson, North Carolina looked really, really interesting a couple weeks ago and now is not really at all interesting other than the fact that I think it's going to be a really good game. How do you see this with, again, I think Clemson's got a little bit of the LSU factor right now, which is a couple of days ago, they were in a position where it wasn't crazy to think if they won their last few games, they were in the playoff. Now they're out.
Yep.
North Carolina, yeah, at one point they were like 9-1 or whatever, but they were never even, what was their high water mark in the rankings? I mean, were they like 12? I mean, they were never.
No, they were never a real factor to make the
I mean,
playoff, I don't think.
there's North Carolina seems to have, you would think, maybe the motivation factor here of winning the ACC. They're trying to establish themselves as the best program in the conference. That crown has obviously been on Clemson's head for quite a while now. So I think there's some dragon slaying type stuff here on North Carolina's end. I'm wondering, Clemson's almost an 8-point favorite, 7.5-point favorite there. Do you think, first of all, I guess, do you think that's a fair line?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair line. I make it 8.5. My number's right. The total 63.5. I'm at 63. So I mean I think the lines on this game are set pretty tight. I think this is a type of game where Clemson's defense can kind of earn its reputation a little bit, and North Carolina's defense is so bad that the Clemson offensive deficiencies aren't going to be as exploited as they have been in some of their bigger games. So from a matchup standpoint, I think this is a really good matchup for Clemson. The one caveat being Clemson's secondary has been a little susceptible. So like if Drake May goes nuts here, I'm not going to be floored by it, but I do think Clemson's probably the more complete team here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good matchup for the Clemson offense, which, at times has been turnover prone and at times has been stale, but
Yep.
seem to be picking up a little bit of late. North Carolina's defense is still, to me, a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good matchup for Clemson as far as a team that maybe at times can be a little lacking in offense, in confidence offensively. I'm fascinated to see Drake May against the Clemson defensive front. Clemson's, and it hasn't always played out this way in terms of like their defensive statistics, but there are a ton of first round picks on the Clemson defense.
Yep.
Like in that front seven, like I don't think people maybe even realize just how many there are. When we look back in 3 years on this defense they have this year, there's gonna be a lot of first round draft picks on this defense.
Yep.
So Drake May's been amazing. I think, again, yeah, I think that over under is interesting. I think that's about right. 63.5. I think it's gonna be high scoring. I think Clemson wins. I think it's one of those games where Vegas kind of has it really nailed.
Yep.
Like I think Clemson's going to win by like 7 to 10 points in a high scoring game. Like it's kind of like
Yep.
a 38 to 28, 38-31 type of game.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I think the line's spot on, and I think Clemson wins.
All right. Big 12. What are we doing here? Big 12, Kansas State, TCU. Gosh, TCU 2.5-point favorites right now. Over unders of 62, I think, ish, give or take a half point, I guess, depending where you're doing your wagering. TCU beat Kansas State 38-28, I think was the previous score. Kansas State was up 28-10 in that game. Obviously, this is a huge game for TCU. It's a huge game for Ohio State. It's a huge game maybe even for a USC if you'd rather play Michigan than Georgia. And then again, if you're clinging to the Alabama stuff, which I'm not, but so what do you see here? I think this is the one where I think you're going to call the upset, right?
Yeah, I mean, my numbers make this like literally a toss up, like Kansas State by 0.1, as you can see here on the power rating. So, I mean, it literally a coin flip. And again, when they played the first time, I understand that TCU won, but Kansas State, when healthy, was the better team on the field that day. And then, and what are the odds that their first two quarterbacks get injured in that game? I mean, and like you said, even once Adrian Martinez went out, Will Howard was still just steering the ship, and they were cruising. And then when he went out and the third stringer came in, that's when it all went downhill. So I mean, Kansas State's playing great lately, in particular. So I think Kansas State's going to win.
I agree. I think, and this is not, there are football reasons here, but what's going to cause the most debate? If USC loses or if TCU loses, I think it's if TCU loses. I think we're going to have that, 24 hours or whatever it's going to be, or maybe probably a little less than that, of like pure, like, oh my gosh, what's the committee going to do?
Twitter's going to be on fire.
TCU fans, Ohio State fans losing their minds, Alabama fans shouting from like somewhere way off in the distance that they somehow belong in. I think that's the one that causes the most chaos. Not just always I don't know. College football's just always seems to happen that way. Like it always seems to like what's going to cause the most debate. And I think that's going to be that. But I also think it's a good spot for Kansas State for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, I think they match up very well. I think they're a very physical team. I think they can beat you a couple of different ways. I mean, yes, at their core, they're going to want to beat you kind of grounded and pounded, but they've got some ability to beat you off play action. They got some ability to throw the ball downfield. Love Deuce Vaughn. Yep. I think it's a good spot just from a stylistic component. And, we talked about the USC Utah revenge factor. I think this one's interesting because you have the motivation factor for Kansas State to rectify the loss, coupled with the notion that for, 3 quarters, they were in pretty good shape in that game. So there's not a lack of confidence. It's not like TCU just, blew them out of the water and, they're going to come to this game kind of a little bit intimidated. They should be ready to roll. They should feel confident. They should feel really good about themselves. And again, in that spot of kind of playing spoiler. So I like Kansas State. God, that over-under is good again. 62. I'll say like Kansas State 35, TCU 31, something like that. That's kind of how I see this playing out.
Yeah, and I just looked at my offensive and defensive ratings, and the thing that really jumps out to me here is I've got Kansas State as the 9th best defense, TCU 40th best defense. And then on offense, like you think of TCU as like this offensive machine. I've got them 15th and Kansas State 17th. So the offenses are pretty similarly ranked, but the defenses, there's a stark difference there in Kansas State's favor. So I think I'm going to go with the Wildcats here.
Yeah, I guess I think a lot of your numbers seem to back that up. I think a lot of people kind of view Kansas State as like maybe a defensive team that does just enough offensively. That's really not been the case this year. They're one of the more balanced teams in the country. Offensive, defensive. I think they're one of the more balanced teams in the country. I think there's only a handful of other teams I think that would fall into their kind of category of balance. So I think they can win. I like the over under. I like the over here. I like the number. I think it's about right. So I'm expecting it to probably be played in the high 20s to mid 30s. But again, I think Kansas State could win if this game gets into 41-38, Kansas State could win a game 41-38. If this, if weirdly enough, for whatever reason, it became a defensive slugfest, Kansas State, I think, is fully equipped to win a game 17-14 if they need.
Yeah, they're way more equipped to do that than TCU would be. So if they can, I think that would probably have to be your hope if you're Kansas State, is that you can pull them into that type of slugfest as opposed to getting into a track meet, which, like you said, I do think Kansas State can win, but I think that it's much more likely that they win if they can pull TCU into a slugfest and make them play some defense.
So you probably like the under then a little bit more than I would. I do.
So my numbers make it 56.5. So I'm like a touchdown shy of where that's at. Wow. But again, like TCU is just one of those teams. I mean, you got a defense ranked in the 40s. Like that's concerning. Like even though there is value on the number there, like I'm with you. If the game ended up 41-38, I wouldn't be surprised. So I don't know that I'm going to bet that, even though there's seems to be value on the number there.
Yeah, like I threw out like 35-31, and it could be one of those 30. Like there's a couple different types of games where you're talking about scoring in the mid 60s and into the low 70s. Like some of these games, there's these Pac-12 games where it's kind of a defense optional thing where it's just chunk yardage, big plays left and right. This could be one of those efficiency type 35-31s where it doesn't mean there's going to be a ton of possessions. It just means
they're scoring every time.
TCU's a very very strong offensive team. They've got good quarterback play. They've got good receiver. Quentin Johnson's a stud. They got running backs. They can just kind of efficiently move the ball. And Kansas State's, I think, built similarly in that regard, where they've got Howard and Vaughn, and they've got different guys that can keep the chains moving, so to speak, versus I'm not seeing this like, there's going to be, 10 plays of 50 plus yards. I don't think it's necessarily going to play out that way. Right. I just think both teams are going to be pretty efficient offensively, and if given enough possessions, you're going to see 9 or 10 touchdowns total.
Yep.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Like I said, we're going to do this each week. We're looking forward to doing it next week when the final ones come out. We'll try and get this out maybe a little earlier next week because of the timing of everything, but appreciate everyone listening and watching, and we will see you guys next week with a breakdown of the final rankings.